National Evolutionary Synthesis Center and Understanding Evolution, this is the Evolution in the News story for December 2008. I'm Elsa Youngstead. The Earth is home to many millions of species, from bacteria to grasses, from mushrooms to elephants. A particular environment, and the species that live in it, are collectively called an ecosystem. Even a single ecosystem, such as a prairie, forest, or pond, may consist of hundreds or thousands of different kinds of organisms. Biodiversity is the word that ecologists use to describe this variety of life on Earth. Scientists are still working to understand how species that live together affect one another, and how changes in biodiversity could alter the health and stability of ecosystems. But there are different ways to measure biodiversity. Sometimes ecologists just count the number of species, or they may factor in species abundance and rarity, or the variety of ecological roles in a group of organisms. Now, ecologist Mark Haddad and his colleagues have tried out yet another measure of biodiversity that takes into account evolutionary history. In this approach, a more diverse group of organisms doesn't just include more species, it also includes more distantly related species that have been evolving separately for a longer time. For example, a prairie made up of 5 kinds of grass would be less diverse than a prairie made up of grass, asters, buttercups, lupins, and foxgloves. Dr. Nick Haddad, an associate professor of biology at North Carolina State University, studies ecology and conservation biology. In this interview, he talks about how Haddad's research gives new insights into the meaning and importance of biodiversity.
This study provides 3 important messages for conservation. The first is that, better than any previous study, it provides the finest point yet on how the diversity of species affects the functioning of ecosystems. And so, in so doing, helps support reasons for conservation based on conserving functioning of ecosystems and services provided to humans. Second, this paper provides a framework for understanding how the rarest species, those species that couldn't be part of experiments, are important in the functioning of ecosystems. So using this framework of evolutionary history, we could understand how the extinction of a species, of a rare species, might impair ecosystem functioning. And third, by understanding the role of evolutionary history in affecting the functioning of ecosystems, it gives us some insight into the evolutionary potential that we might be losing when species are lost and in a changing world. We know that climate change and habitat loss are all changing the environments that species live in and the evolutionary forces affecting those species. And this study of evolutionary history gives us more insight and justification into conserving evolutionary potential of those species as environments are changing into the future.
This study reanalyzed data from several previous experiments. What new information did the study uncover by looking at the old data?
This study makes a stronger relationship to factors that affect plant productivity because it does the best job of pinpointing the functional roles of plants and their effects on ecosystems. Let me start here with an analogy. I sometimes think of the effects of diversity on how ecosystems work like the members of a football team and how they make a football team good. On a football team, if I were to say you could pick the team with the best 11 players in the world to make your team, you might end up with a team that's full of quarterbacks like Brett Favre or Peyton Manning and Eli Manning. Well, that team would be beaten by any other team in the world because it's not representative of the the diversity of roles needed to make a football team good. Well, by analogy, what people have done in these biodiversity experiments is assigned plants to functional groups that they decide. And so this would, going back to the football analogy, this would be like putting the best 11 players on defense or the best 11 players on offense. What they do in plant diversity studies is put plants into groups like grasses that grow best in summer, grasses that grow best in spring or fall, plants that live in association with bacteria to fix nitrogen, to generate nitrogen. Well, what this study does is really pinpoints the functional role of plants by taking advantage of their evolutionary history. The idea is that plants that are most different in their evolutionary history are also most different in how they use their ecosystem and take advantage of their ecosystem. So these might be plants that have roots that go deep into the soil that can take advantage of nitrogen way down in the soil, or plants that have very shallow roots that take advantage of nitrogen at the soil surface. Well, by taking advantage of evolutionary history and all the evolutionary changes that have occurred over the course of that history, they're able to put the finest point yet on the functional differences among plants that lead to diversity, creating the most productive ecosystems.
What is plant productivity, and why is it important to ecology?
So the productivity of plants is critical to how ecosystems work. From the perspective of plants themselves, productivity is important because it determines the number and variety of plants that are present within an ecosystem. But plant productivity has important influences that go much beyond that. The productivity of plants is important to the number and variety of things that eat plants, that is, the herbivores. And then that goes throughout the entire food chain. So the productivity of plants determines not just the herbivores, but their predators and the whole variety of life within food chains. And so by understanding plant productivity, we can understand what determines how ecosystems work. But that's not the only reason that productivity is important. Understanding plant productivity is important because it captures how ecosystems work in ways that are important to humans. So think about productivity from another perspective, from a really simple ecosystem, like in an agricultural system, let's say a corn crop. The more productive a cornfield, the more food that it produces for humans. Well, some natural ecosystems are productive in ways that provide foods for humans. But that's not the only way that productivity is important for ecosystems and ways that humans use those ecosystems. So let's take another example. We're worried right now about carbon dioxide that's increasing in the atmosphere. Well, plants and their ecosystems sop up that carbon in the atmosphere. Plants sop up the carbon as plants grow. And so plant productivity is a measure for how much carbon is being taken out of the atmosphere by ecosystems. And that taking carbon out of the ecosystem is providing a service to humans, humans that are putting carbon out into the atmosphere. Well, there's many other functions that ecosystems provide services to humans and at no cost. And so plant productivity is one way that we measure the services that ecosystems provide humans.
How is plant productivity measured?
So what ecologists do is they go out and they clip, in these systems that we're talking about today, they're grassland ecosystems. And so the plant productivity is the amount of plant that grows every year within the ecosystem. That plant material dies back above the soil surface every year, and the new growth is the production for that year. So ecologists can go out and just clip off the plants that grow within a year, weigh them, and get an estimate of plant productivity. It's a lot easier then to measure plant productivity than it is to measure the amount of carbon absorbed or the amount of pollutants taken out of the ecosystem, or how climate is made better for humans by ecosystems.
What are the implications of the study for conservation?
This study may inform how we think about conservation in a world that's changing, where climate's warming and habitats are being lost and many other changes are affecting the communities that species live in and the way that they function. What this study shows is that the evolutionary history of species affects the numbers and types of traits within communities that affects how ecosystems work. By the same token, that variety of traits conserved now may affect the future potential for evolution of species going out in the future as climate changes and as habitats are lost, and may affect how those ecosystems work. Going back to the football analogy, the idea would be that you have now a variety of players, not just filling a variety of roles, but also backups to all of those roles. And if you had that large variety going forward, if the starting quarterback's knocked out, you have a strong backup to pull in to help that football team win. And likewise, as environments change going into the future, some species will perform less well, but if there are other species with other evolutionary histories that can step into that role, they can create functioning environments that continue to perform the services that humans depend on.
Why did you choose this career?
I became a conservation biologist because I wanted to dedicate my career to understanding the conservation of biological diversity. There are many ways that I could have gone about this. There are important people involved in biodiversity conservation in politics, in law, in economics, and many other areas, but particularly in science. And so related to that is that given all these options, I wanted to do what I loved. And what I love doing is being out in nature, thinking about the diversity and complexity of life and living things. And so what I like to do most is to understand first, how is it that biodiversity is being lost? But more importantly, what strategies we can use in conservation to prevent the loss of biological diversity and to promote the diversity and functioning of ecosystems.
For more information about this story, including links to primary and popular literature and classroom resources, visit the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center website or the Understanding Evolution website. More stories are available in the Evolution in the News archives on either site. The National Evolutionary Synthesis Center is funded by the National Science Foundation to promote research in biological evolution.